And I used to get a little bit frustrated by that because I'm like, my gosh, why don't they just take the easy way? Like, why aren't they thinking the same way I was? And you have to understand, like, perspective was, at this point in my career, I'm working with people from all over the world, right? Different cultures, different backgrounds. They were from all over the world. And one thing I realized over time was that.
Welcome to the Matt Phillips Podcast. I am Matt Phillips, your sales leadership coach, mental toughness expert, and founder of Matt Phillips Coaching.
Welcome to today's podcast. It is Matt coming to you live from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A little different than I normally do, but I was so busy before I got out of town that, normally when I record a podcast, I'm doing it at home with my really cool microphone, my camera, all that sort of stuff. Because what we do is with each podcast, we actually put it on the YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, head on over there. It's Matt Phillips Leadership Coaching. And then we take the audio and obviously make it into a podcast. So if you're watching us on YouTube, it's probably going to be just a screen of the title of what we're here to talk about. Just a little bit different than normal. If you're on the podcast, hey, you don't notice a difference at all. But excited to be here in about a day where I'm going to spend a full day with a leadership team here in Florida. And we're talking all things leadership, mental toughness, about growing their team. So I'm recording this. I'm looking over the ocean, watching the waves roll in. It's just an awesome place to be. I'm very, very blessed and thankful to get to do what I do every day. And with that in mind, on today's podcast, I want to dive into 5 different lessons that I learned living over in Europe. And we all have these experiences that we go through, right, in life. And maybe it's traveling somewhere, maybe it's living somewhere else. Maybe it's just a project that we happen to be on at work or something that we're going through. And oftentimes we don't take the time to reflect about, what we learned until later on. And I wanted to spend some time just reflecting with you a little bit about kind of my experience in Europe twice and just what it's taught me and how it's kind of transformed me into the leader that I am today. And I hope today that this really makes you think about experiences that you've had over your career and over your life, and really think about the good and the bad and what you learned, again, whether it was positive or negative, that's made you to the leader that you are today. It's really important that we take time to reflect on some of these things. So I'll share a couple of stories with you today and go through these lessons. They're in absolutely no particular order whatsoever. But, when I lived in Europe, there were 2 experiences that I had. One was from a baseball perspective. So that's where I had my professional opportunity. I lived in a town called Wiener Neustadt and played baseball there. And that was the first experience over in Europe. And then the second one was actually when I was in the corporate world, working for one of the big 4 public accounting firms, Ernst & Young, now EY as they rebranded. I had the opportunity to take a 3-year international assignment in Zurich, Switzerland. And it was so cool because my wife and I got married 2 weeks before we moved there. And we traveled, did a bunch of really, really cool things. And then our first baby was actually born in Zurich. And so that was a whole different experience compared to in the United States. I'm not going to get into that today, the difference in having a child over there versus here. But, just with travel, everything, the business world, everything we experienced was just tremendous. That I'm going to talk a lot about that today. So here's really the 5 things that I have learned that I hope you can leverage. And again, I hope triggers you thinking about some experiences you've had as well. And the first one that I wrote down was this: my way isn't the only way. Now, when I moved to Zurich specifically, I was working and auditing a massive client. It's one of the biggest banks in the world. And, this is fairly early on in my management part of my career, right? So I had a few people that worked for me. And then I just got more and more responsibility as I moved overseas and took on this role in Zurich. And I remember there were certain things where I would get frustrated. And it was really because I was a new manager, but I get frustrated because I thought in my mind that the team would approach things a certain way, right? That they'd think about that same issue like the way I do and, do step A, B, and C. And what I found is they were doing A, Y, Z, and then C. And I used to get a little bit frustrated by that because I'm like, my gosh, why don't they just take the easy way? Like, why aren't they thinking the same way I was? And you have to understand, like, perspective was, at this point in my career, I'm working with people from all over the world, right? Different cultures, different backgrounds. They were from all over the world. And one thing I realized over time was that there are numerous ways to solve an issue. There are numerous ways to tackle a problem. to solution something. And I learned as a leader that I had to allow some freedom of the people because they thought differently than me, right? So if they need to go, like I would go A, B, C, if they needed to go A, Y, Z, and then end up at C, I had to pay attention to that and allow that freedom to occur, right? Because at the end of the day, we always got to the same answer, or usually we got to the same answer, right? If they're so far off track, well, that's a whole different thing. But usually they would get to the right answer. And what I learned is that when you allow that freedom, right, that people start to take ownership a little bit more, they understand that there's, some flexibility in how they think and how they react to certain things. And that really empowers people over time, right? Now, as a leader, right, I had to learn that I couldn't let them go off, the rails for days and days and days, right? When something took an hour to solve. That's something I had to learn to balance. But that was a huge learning for me of looking at it from a perspective of like, my way isn't the only way. Like my way is a way and it works and will get you there, but it's not the only way, right? We can get to the same solution with that flexibility and thinking. And again, that was the first one that I learned. And I'm so thankful that I did work from people from all over the world. And you don't have to have this, global experience to do that, because even within your own office, if you work in whatever country you're in, you're going to have people who think way differently than you, right? That have more of that creative flair or don't, or that's a beautiful thing, right? If we allow that as a boss, right? Allow some sort of flexibility in there to get to the same answers. That was a big, big lesson for me. And the first one I wanted to share with you. You're probably thinking of all the ways now that when people you manage and have led, or maybe a leader you've had that maybe where you've allowed it or you didn't allow it, or that leader allowed it or didn't allow it. And I bet you can feel the difference between when that flexibility is there versus when it is not. So super, super interesting for me. So that's number one. My way isn't the only way. The second thing that I learned from living overseas was there is a extremely important piece when you're building relationships with people to understand their backgrounds and their culture and their stories. And when I look back at my career, one thing that I don't know if it's something I grew up with or something that was innate within me that I was born with, but I am genuinely curious about people and their background. I mean, lo and behold, I flew into Fort Lauderdale today and I was working so much. I was heads down cranking. I love airplane flights. I get so much done. And towards the end, I had said hi to the couple next to me, when they got on and we originally sat down. Then I went to work, and at about 30 minutes left in the flight, I closed the laptop, put it away, and had a discussion with these people. And I found out about their background, about businesses they had owned, and the type of work they had done. They were both retired now. And it was so fun and fascinating to learn about these individuals and their journey and path. And when I lived overseas, and this is true of any relationship, when you're in leadership, in my opinion, right, you have to spend time getting to know their story and their background and their culture to have a deep understanding of, the way they think, why they think that way, why they may approach things a certain way, and just get to know them on that personal level. And it's such a underestimated thing, but so powerful. And if you want to unlock someone's potential on your team, you have to get to know them personally, in my opinion, right? Now, you don't have to know everything about them and all the good and bad in their life, but we should certainly know a little more about them. We can ask those questions and just be curious about it. And I remember one story in particular. I was actually at a university at a business symposium. So they pull this together. They have different leaders come, get on panels and talk about certain things. And I remember this day, I was sitting in the audience and this panel came up about this topic, right? About influencing individuals, right? And how do you work in an international business environment? And they were talking about one of the questions posed by someone else in the group. One of the questions was, do you think it's important to learn the language of the country that you're in? And a couple people had different perspectives, things like that. And I remember this one CEO said, I'll never forget it, he flat out said, it's not important because, everybody speaks English. And I actually stood up in this symposium and raised my hand and had a comment to make about this because I was so adamant about it. But I said, I'm sorry, sir, to disagree with you, but it's my experience having lived overseas and things like that. The effort you put in to learn the language it builds relationships, it builds rapport, it makes you stick out from other people, be different than other people, and really fosters this kind of community, this relationship, right? That you're not just there in the country to do your own thing, but to learn about their culture, and the way they do things. And that is so important. I think that's why I've experienced success in my career, is because I was willing to do that. And so in Switzerland, I should say, and this is true in Austria too, I tried my best to speak the language, and I was awful, just absolutely awful. I knew enough to be dangerous, but I remember one in particular we had to call. It was like the electric or gas company over there. Something happened. I don't know, something wrong with the bill or something. And so I called, and the woman answered, and I asked her, "Sprechen Sie English?" and which means, "Do you speak English?" for you non-German speakers. And she goes, "Nein," which is no. And I said, in my head, I go, "All right, here we go." And so I started doing the best I could at the German side of things. And finally, probably a minute or two into this, me probably fumbling, sounding like a absolute fool, she goes, "Okay, sir, I speak English. What's the problem?" And that's a silly little example, but it's like I wanted to put forth that effort to try to meet her where she was at. And I bet she was sure hopeful that this English speaking guy could figure it out from a German perspective. But unfortunately, I wasn't. And again, this goes back to like building that relationships, understanding stories, backgrounds, culture, just little things about getting another language and all these sorts of things. It gives you such valuable insight into your team, into again, how they think, act, behave, because that will influence how you get them to do things. It's such a huge thing. Even when I lived in Austria playing baseball, there were a lot of Austrian players over there and only one other American or English speaker. And it was my duty and job just to understand them and their stories. And once you do, you're like, my mind was blown of like, wow, like I can't believe that these guys or these women have these sorts of stories. It shifts your perspective completely, right? When you understand what they've gone through, what they're maybe going through. So that was the second thing that I wrote down, that hopefully you're thinking about some people you've come across, and when you've understood their stories and what they're about, that maybe, I don't know, you've seen that benefit too, that elevated relationship, able to get more out of the people around you just by understanding those people. It's a huge thing. All right, so that's the second one. The third one that I wrote down was this: you have to go after what you want, right? If you wait for it, if you assume it's coming your way, it'll never come your way. You have to go after what you want. Such an important thing. I can't tell you how many conversations I have when I'm coaching about people desiring something. Maybe that's that promotion or raise, or they just need help with a project or help with a sale or something like that. And it's getting people to understand that like we have more power than we think, right? We have more influence than we think. And I want you to hear this and know this, right? It's not just about going to get a raise and more money and all that stuff. It can be, but it's like we have more influence than we think. I've talked about this on other podcasts as well. And once you understand this and embrace this and then start approaching things that way, some pretty cool things can happen. And the reality is that when I look back at my experiences in Europe, living over in Austria and then having opportunity to go over in Switzerland, the only reasons they happened was because I went after them. Like I sought them out. And I'm gonna tell you right now, when I started doing it, I was scared to death to actually send the emails, make the calls, tell people, because I think that when we know in our hearts that we have this, I don't know, this dream or desire to, whatever it might be, that sometimes we hesitate a little bit because we're like, first of all, it's like, well, is that possible? And second of all, like, I have no idea how I'm going to make that happen. And so we think it's so far out there that we can't even sometimes conceive. I don't know if you've ever felt that before. We can't even conceive, like, how is that going to happen? And I'll tell you a story about Zurich, about going over there when I was in the corporate world. And again, I'd lived in Europe before. And when I started with Ernst & Young, pretty early on, I communicated to the partners that I worked for that at some point I would like to go international with the firm. And I told them that, you know, I'd lived overseas before. I had this itch. I'd love to go back again and be able to work there. And I made it known pretty early, right? Now, I wasn't shouting it from the hills. I didn't make a t-shirt that said, "Send me international." I didn't talk about it every single day, but I did have a discussion with my bosses to say, this is my intention. This is what I would like to do. So if you happen to hear of opportunities, please let me know. I also had some classmates that I went to grad school with that happened to be with the firm as well. And they knew like kind of what I wanted to do as well, because we talked about it. And I want to pause here for a minute, because this is an important point I talked to a lot of people about, is sometimes, And I do this too, right? We all get to this, we can get in this stage, but we assume that kind of people know what we want. And the reality is they don't know what you want, right? You could be sitting here and I could be thinking to myself like, okay, the listeners of the podcast know what I want, right? What type of business I'm trying to grow. And that could be good, right? Because, you listen to the podcast and you probably know what I do. But the reality is you probably don't know everything that we do, right? And unless I tell you that, for example, that we do one-on-one coaching, that we do workshops for companies. That's why I'm in Fort Lauderdale, right? If I never told you that we have the High Performance Leadership Program, which is an online program with ongoing training and group coaching calls that people can take advantage of, you have no idea that we do that. And so if I make that assumption, then I'm kind of losing an opportunity, right? Because any of those things might be so interesting to you. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know Matt did that. And I can't, by the way, I had lunch with a president of a company here in Denver that I've known for years. And he actually said, I didn't know you did that. I'm like, oh my gosh, Matt. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, how did he not know that? But the reality is people don't sit around thinking about me all day. And I don't know if people sit around thinking about you all day. But that's why it's so important that we have to advocate for ourselves. We have to let it be known of like, this is our intention. Now, that doesn't mean it happens overnight. It doesn't mean that you get what you want instantly. There's still work to be put in, but we have to advocate for ourselves. It's so important.
I wanted to take a quick break from the podcast to invite you to something very special that we're up to at Matt Phillips Coaching. It's what we call the High Performance Leadership Program. Now, we know that leading people can be challenging. It also can be extremely rewarding. And one thing that I found as you progress in leadership and want to take that next level, get that promotion, continue to move up the ladder, is you have to continually invest in yourself. And you have to set yourselves apart from other people. And you have to continue to not only grow as a leader, but you have to grow your mental toughness, your mindset, because that is the one true differentiator. That's exactly why we built the High Performance Leadership Program, to come alongside you on a monthly basis, to give you the tools, training, and resources, and coaching with me to help you elevate your performance. So I invite you to head over to mattphillipscoaching.com/membership and join us today in the High Performance Leadership Program. Let's make your dreams and your career and your business a reality.
And we can talk about that. Maybe that's another podcast episode where I'll talk a little about kind of how to do it and where you're not so overwhelmed. But simply put, I just talked to some partners and said, hey, I'm working in Kansas City, Missouri right now, and I'm happy here. I like it. But if there is an opportunity overseas, I'd love to talk about it. And they're like, all right, that's awesome, Matt. I love your, like, where you want to go and things like that. There's really nothing right now, but we'll keep it in mind. I'm like, awesome. So the question becomes, how did I get over to Zurich, Switzerland? You're probably asking yourself. Well, again, here's the beauty of people knowing what you want. It was into my second year of work and probably 4 months into that third year. And I got a call from one of my friends in the New York EY office. His name's Matt Creedon. And Matt called and said, hey, I just heard that they have a need for auditors over in Zurich, Switzerland to work on the client that I work on here in New York. You want me to start putting you in touch with the partners to get the process rolling? Out of the blue, he called me and told me this. And I was like, Matt, please put me in touch with the partners. Let's get this thing rolling. It was almost 7 months to the day of that phone call from Matt that I was standing in Zurich, Switzerland, because he hooked me up with some New York partners who hooked me up with the Zurich partners. And everyone was talking to my partners in Kansas City. And lo and behold, we pulled the thing together. And 7 months later, my kind of dream, my ambition, that desire actually happened. It was crazy. But I sometimes think back to like, what if I never would have said anything? Like, I wonder if they would have figured it out. And the answer is no, like they would not have figured it out. Not because they didn't care either, but we have to put forth what we want. That is a massive one for me that I absolutely wanted to share with you because I think it's so critical. And there's so many different stories I could tell you about just even starting Matt Phillips Leadership Coaching, that I had to make my intention known. And I was scared to death a lot of the time, right? But once we do it and once we start that process, some pretty amazing things can happen. So I want you to keep that in mind. Maybe, again, you look back and there's certain circumstances where maybe you let something be known and you're like, holy moly, it actually happened. Or maybe one of your teammates told you they had a desire to do something, and maybe it's simple, like working on a project or taking on something extra or whatever it might be. And you allowed that freedom, and I bet you saw them light up. Pretty amazing things. But that was the third thing that I really learned from living overseas is you have to go after what you want, and you have to let people know about it as well. The last two are pretty similar, but the fourth one that I want to share with you today is this lesson of, if you want to experience growth, you must get out of your comfort zone. This lesson I have learned in sports, living in Europe, starting a business, running a business. It's all about getting out of your comfort zone. And what I found is when you do make that leap, make that jump, and it doesn't have to be something big, right? You don't have to go move to Europe. You don't have to move to Australia. You don't have to move anywhere. But when you take that leap, like, a couple of things happen. One, I believe that's where the best stories come from. Like, I mean, think about it, right? When you got out of your comfort zone, whether it went well or not, like, that's where the best stories come from. And I love that aspect of it because everybody loves a good story, right? And so I imagine you have some really good stories too, but the best stories come from that. And probably a little more importantly is that's where true growth happens, right? That's where you're over to overcome the mindset, the negative self-talk, the things that are holding you back. And I talk a lot about the mental toughness side. That's what we're talking about, mentally tough leaders. That's what we're here to build. Well, mental toughness, we often have those things that those doubts and fears that everyone experiences, including me, but they can get in your way. And as soon as you get out of your comfort zone, that's when the magic happens, right? So not only do you have a great story, but now you've got something to build upon to go tackle that next thing. And so when I look at, both times that I moved overseas, I was really, really nervous. I remember the first time I moved over to Austria, I flew over, I went and met the baseball team right away, took ground balls, hit a little bit, and then went home. And I was staying with a host family. And so I'm in a country that I really don't speak the language, living with a host family that I don't know, playing on a baseball team that I just met. And also add in the fact that I had jet lag. So I'm up at like 1 a.m. over in Europe. I can't sleep. One thing that is very, very clear about me is that two things need to happen for Matt Phillips to be happy. One is eat and have enough in my belly. Second is sleep. Man, if I don't eat and I don't sleep, like I can be grumpy, right? And we don't want grumpy Matt at all. So I called my parents at 1 a.m. and I'm like, I want to come home. Like, this is not a fit. And they knew, right, that I was just tired and needed to sleep. And as soon as I slept, I'd be fine. But so they let me vent, do my thing. And then I said, let's, wake up the next day and see how things are. And then I slept better and better every night, right? And I ended up having an amazing time over there. But it was just the fact of, like, I wasn't calling because I was tired. I was calling because I was fearful. I was scared. I was out of my comfort zone. And I needed that reassurance from my parents in this case to just reset me a little bit and be like, okay, like, hold on, you're fine. You're safe. It's okay. And as soon as I did that, I was able to move past that, where to the point of that one experience gave me the fire inside to go move to Zurich, Switzerland, and put myself out there that I wanted to do that. But that's where the greatest growth comes. So then I have the opportunity to go over to Zurich, Switzerland. And I'll tell you, like, I was nervous, right? Because I'm moving over there. I have a financial services background. That's the kind of companies I would audit. So banks and broker dealers and all those sorts of things. And I moved to work and audit one of the biggest banks in the world, and with people who've worked internationally, with people from all over the world. And I was nervous because I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta prove myself somehow and do this and do that. But that's where I saw some amazing, amazing growth. And every experience that I look back on that I was able to build upon, right? It was those times where I chose to get out of my comfort zone where some amazing things happen and just built upon it. And as I'm talking now, I even think about, there's a point in my career where I wanted out of accounting, right? I wanted to do something different, operations, finance, marketing, something. I wanted to, as I put it, kind of add new tools to my tool belt, right? Or put more weapons in my arsenal. I don't know how you want to say it, but I wanted a new experience. And I was working for this big, big company here in the United States. And I didn't even know, like, finance or marketing or operations. Like, that's huge. Like, I don't know what company you work for or companies you've worked for in the past, but those are big things. I mean, they're not small departments. So you could do probably hundreds, thousands of different things. And so I'm like, well, okay, I've got to learn about these things. So I've got to start asking questions. And I remember I was working for this big company and Fortune 500 company. And I was thinking to myself, okay, here's my strategy. I'm just going to take people to lunch or coffee and just ask them questions about their path and their journey and just what they do. That was the strategy. Very, very simple. And I was like, okay, marketing. I don't know anybody in marketing, by the way, at this company. So I'm like, who knows about marketing? And I go, well, there's one person I know who knows about marketing, and that's the chief marketing officer. And so I sent an email, if you can believe this, to the chief marketing officer of a Fortune 500 company who I didn't know. And I said, hey, I'd like to take you to lunch and just learn about your path, your journey of how you got to where you're at, if you'd be willing, right? As I kind of round up my career, things like that. And I sent the email and I couldn't believe I hit send, to be honest. And she'll never answer. And lo and behold, this woman named Joan answers me about an hour later saying, I'd love to go to lunch. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I sat for an hour and bought her lunch and I had a conversation with her about her journey, her path. Did it go anywhere? No. Did I get a marketing job? No. But I learned so much from that, just about the way the company was structured, that it's still something that I talk about today. It was that impactful, but me getting out of my comfort zone, and people kept asking me afterwards, like, why are you sitting with the CMO at lunch? I'm like, I don't know, just learning about what she does and how she does it. I mean, that was my answer. I'm like, but I was out of my comfort zone, but I knew I had to do it, because that led to the next conversation and the next conversation and the next conversation. And when we get out of our comfort zone, those things that seem overwhelming all of a sudden become easier and easier and easier, and not so overwhelming, less and less every single time. That's the beauty of getting out of your comfort zone. And it could be something as small as taking a cold shower and turning it into cold water for 10 seconds. That gets you out of your comfort zone. That works on the mental side of things. And again, I wonder for you, like, what are ways that you in your career have got out of your comfort zone, or in your life? It doesn't have to be your career, but in your life, have you got out of your comfort zone? And I would ask you, like, if you were recording a podcast right now, what would you tell me that you learned? Was it something similar to me? Was it different? And sometimes, again, it goes well. Sometimes it doesn't. But we always have lessons learned from it, don't we? Such a cool thing. So that's that fourth one that I wanted to share with you today. And then the fifth one is, I don't know, fairly basic. It's tied to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, but here's what I wrote down. Excitement in life starts with being adventurous, meeting new people, traveling, and experiencing life. When I look back at the opportunities I had over in Europe, it was because I embraced those things I just said. That adventurous side, being open to new people, new ways of thinking, about traveling, just about experiencing life. And it was interesting, even on the flight over today, talking to that couple for that 30 minutes as we landed, we talked for some reason about how they give their focus is not so much on giving gifts to their grandkids, but on creating experiences with them. And that really resonated with me, because I think that my kids are going to remember more of the trips we took or the time we spent with them than some fancy doodad that I bought them. I don't even know if doodad's a word, but some piece of technology or something like that. I know they talk about the experiences we've had in travel so far. And I think that's what life is about this experience, about getting out and doing something new, or getting around people and spending time with them and learning about them and laughing and crying sometimes, but just being with others. I think that's where the magic lies. And, I could say I learned that from going over to Europe. I think it's something that my parents taught me early on that I didn't realize they were teaching me. I think it was, playing collegiate baseball, going overseas and taking that professional opportunity, wanting to go to Zurich. Like, I knew there was something else we wanted to do. We lived in Zurich. My wife and I got to travel quite a bit. And one of our favorite trips was up to Norway, where we traced our family history and got to meet both sides of our family, which was just incredible. We got to actually go to a farm where her great-great-grandfather was born and lived. And we got to take some tools from the blacksmith shop back home with us. I mean, how cool is that? Or the fact that I actually met a friend. My wife was back in the States at this point, visiting family, but I met a friend over in Paris, and we drove up to the Normandy area, and it was the 60th anniversary of D-Day. And to see that history and experience that and hold weapons in our hands and see the tanks rolling by and read about the history and hear from World War II veterans that were there. I'll never forget that. Like, never. When I stood in the bunker, one of the bunkers where the Nazis were shooting down when the Americans and Canadians and others landed on D-Day, that changes you. It gives you a completely different perspective on things. And you could have handed me a pamphlet, or you could have told me to go watch something on Netflix that had to do with World War II. Does not hold anything to the actual experience of going to Normandy. And that's what life's about, right? Changing ourselves and the feelings that we get and the people we spend time with. And that's what I learned from living in Europe, right? That adventurous side of, and just the experiences that we create. One thing that I remember distinctly was dinner in Europe. And I hope this resonates with you Europeans out there, but I know it will. But I remember our very first dinner in Zurich. My wife and I went to this Italian restaurant. We're used to the American way of eating, right? It's like you are in and you are out. I mean, you have your wine with dinner. It's like bing, bang, boom, bill comes, poo, peace, see ya. In our very first dinner in Zurich, it's just my wife and I. Actually, not even my wife at this point. She's my fiance. And then she returned. We were picking out flats at this point, or apartments. And then she returned, got ready for the wedding. I worked for a little bit, came home, we got married. But we were eating at this thing and we had our wine, had a glass of wine. Then the meal came. And then we were looking around for our waitress. We're like, where in the world is she? And so I kind of look over and I'm like, holy moly, she's over eating dinner. Like I can see like way across the restaurant, she's eating dinner. And I'm like, what the heck? Right? We get in our mindset of like, well, we should have the bill by now. We should be out of here, blah, blah, blah. Well, we get our bill, we move on, right? But here's what we learned over the 3 years that we lived there. Dining, it's an experience. And Europeans and other cultures have put together, they want it to be an experience, right? So you show up to the restaurant and you have your aperitif, right? Your before dinner drink. And then you order, appetizers. And then you order your main course, right? And when you order your main course, then you order the bottle of wine to come to the table. And then you have your drink or coffee afterwards, right? And it's this experience. And it takes we would have dinners for 3 hours at a time. And I know some of you are sitting there like, my gosh, 3 hours for a dinner? But it was so calm and relaxed. And people were talking and interacting. And the time would just go by so quickly. But it's intentionally, we had this person describe it this way. It was like intentionally designed as an experience. And when he explained it that way, I'm like, wow, it's not just like stuff, food in your gullet and down to your belly. It's actually to be in the moment. And I'll never forget that. And that's why we love going out to dinners with friends to this day and just creating an experience. It doesn't have to be 3 hours, but it's, are you in full enjoyment of the experience? It's always back to the experience. So those are just some stories that I wanted to share with you. 5 things that I took away from living in Europe. And again, there were probably 10 things, 20 things that I could have talked to you about today. But those are 5 that just really stuck out that I want to spend some time on with you. So I hope that has got you thinking a little bit about your life, about your career, about maybe the business, if you happen to own a business or run a business, and maybe some ways that you can start thinking differently as you go through your day based on the impact that you were put on this earth to make. So with that, thank you for taking your time today. As always, please head over to mattphillipscoaching.com/membership. Something we're super excited about is the High Performance Leadership Program. And we've launched it with multiple companies, and you have an opportunity. I want to invite you to go check out that membership, which is ongoing training, group coaching calls, all sorts of things in it around leadership and mental toughness to help get you where you want to go. And like I said earlier, right, I can't assume that we have that thing. So there you go. There it is. And that's something that we're up to and we're excited about. So go over to mattphillipscoaching.com/membership. But I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. Thank you for taking time on the podcast, and we'll see you next week. Have a good day.
Thank you for joining us today on the Matt Phillips Podcast. If you are like us, we know that you are here to do great things, to become the sales leader that makes things happen and drives big time sales results. We know you have that big vision, and we are here to help get you where you want to go. We're here to help you develop that unstoppable, rock solid leadership skill set and help you train to master the one true differentiator, mental toughness. We would love to be part of your journey. So if you are ready, head over to mattphillipscoaching.com and check out the ways that we can help. As always, please share this episode and make sure you subscribe by clicking the button below. Thank you again. And now, go crush the day.